Hey everybody, good to see you at the Sermon Roundtable here on Tuesday. And I'm blessed to be with you in your home or in your car, wherever you're at. I'm joined today by Rachel, who's the children's director, family. What's your exact title?
Kid Life Director.
Kid Life Director at Deep Creek. And of course I have Manuela here, who is an assistant pastor here at the Kensler campus. Pastor Joel, who is the campus pastor at Town Center, as well as helps with the teaching. Today we want to talk about the second sermon in our series, Imagine. And it's about legacies, not legacies, it's about milestones. And about making a milestone. And we used as our text this weekend about Israel coming into the promised land. And then we pivoted off that saying, as our children come into different seasons of their life, what's the role of the church and family in celebrating these rites of passage? And so, Pastor Joel, let me toss it over to you and just kind of review for all of us the text and what was happening.
Yeah, so in Joshua, end of Joshua 3, beginning Joshua 4, the writer of Joshua is unpacking Israel's journey from what has been 40 years in the wilderness, crossing through, if you will, the Jordan River or over the Jordan into the promised land. And in this moment, the Lord's going to do something supernatural in their midst. And so, in that being that the priests would take the ark and they would walk into the water. And the text says that the moment they walked into the waters hedged or stopped. Not really clear exactly what that meant, but essentially they were able to walk on dry ground. Somehow the waters stopped. And the entire nation, both at the end of Joshua and the beginning of Joshua 3 and the beginning of Joshua 4, the writer's making, I think, an important point that everybody got over. Man, woman, child, all of them got over. And because it was such a miraculous event, the Lord then tells Joshua to take a stone out of all 12 tribes, again highlighting everybody, right? And to build a memorial or an altar of remembrance or a milestone, if you will. You can use any one of kind of those languages or those titles. And in doing so, when the children of Israel, those younger going in, right, would walk by that, they would ask their parents, why are those there? And it was a marker for the adults of Israel to pass on this moment of great faithfulness to Israel as they went from this transitional period of what was as a nomad to stepping into the promises of what was yet in front of them for Israel.
Right, and so the children would ask their parents, what's this pile of stones about? And that was the opportunity for the parents and grandparents to, again, testify to God's power and his ability to keep and to save. So taking that as a kind of a textual basis, we thought, are there milestones in the Christian life, particularly with our kids, our families, that God would use in a similar way to remind us what was and now what you're going to go into? A line of demarcation, a rite of passage is a good way to think of it. And we have all kinds of rites of passages in our families, in our cultures. For example, a rite of passage in our culture would be high school graduation. That's not true in every culture. It's true in a Western educated culture. Every culture's got rites of passage, and then the church has rites of passage, milestones. So listen, before we talk about the churches, and I'm really excited about that, is what we're going to do with our Imagine campaign. I want to talk about some of the rites of passage that we have learned of in our culture growing up. And Rachel have a Puerto Rican heritage, and we were talking a little bit ago about one of the significant rites of passage for young ladies.
So when a young lady turns 15, and the word 15 in Spanish, the number is 15, they have a quinceañera. some other countries. And this is something that I've found throughout all Latin America, from the Caribbean all the way down to Argentina. All the young ladies celebrate this and families celebrate this. It looks a little different, and some may be extravagant, some may just be in the backyard, but there is always some type of party that celebrates this young lady turning 15. And the significance of 15 is that she's no longer a child, but she has become a young lady. And as I've mentioned, there's all types of way to do this, but one of the significant ceremonies, it very much looks like a wedding. And I've heard Caribbean families say, from Cuba especially, well, if she doesn't get married, at least she has her quince, because it really is that much of a celebration of her life. And honoring of her life as well, and this stage of life. One of the most significant moments is a pair of heels are brought out on a pillow by someone who's that is selected from either a very close family friend or someone she's related to who's younger, and they will bring out these pair of shoes on a satin pillow. And what's very interesting about this is that they're also officiated like a wedding would be by a spiritual leader. And I've seen priests do this. I've seen my own father do this, where he will talk about the significance. So this young lady, as I said, it looks very similar to a wedding. She'll have this very big dress and lots of ruffles. And of course, that depends on the culture and your own personal styling, but there is definitely a significant dress. And under the dress, she's wearing flats, or she might be wearing shoes that indicate that she's not quite ready for heels. And a lot of families stick to this, like, nope, you're not 15, you're not 15, you're not wearing makeup, you're not wearing heels, you're not going to look like that until you turn 15. So that's a very significant change of the shoes into heels is a big part of that. And they're escorted in, and it's a lot of dancing and a lot of food to celebrate, but to commemorate her becoming a young lady. And I also like, even though there isn't a counterpart for the young men, although in some fringe places there might be, the young men arise to this occasion. And so they learn how to become a gentleman in this type of setting. They understand, and I really appreciate that there's a marked feminine role and a masculine role. And he carries her in, and his job is just to carry her in on his arm. In fact, that's how I got married. We had couples come down together because of that marked, like, I'm a man and I present femininity in its best. And I really do appreciate that about the ceremony of all of it, that femininity is celebrated and so is masculinity, and it comes together, and it's a beautiful thing to celebrate. And I think Latinos do it very well.
What's the young lady thinking during all of this? Is she appreciating I know she's being celebrated for sure. In her mind, is she thinking that it's a rite of passage to being treated now as a woman?
Yeah, so there is a little bit of bittersweet. There is a sense of responsibility that she starts to take on, like, okay, I'm putting away my dolls. And there's also a ceremony. I haven't seen it too much, but I've heard of it, that she will pick out a special doll as her quince doll, signifying that this is the last doll I'm going to buy because I'm becoming a young woman. I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to have responsibilities. So there is a little bit of melancholy, I would say, because she is saying goodbye, and it reminds me of when I became a man, I put away childish things. So there is a little bit of that, of saying goodbye to your childhood, but there's also the mixed in with the excitement of, I'm going to be a young lady, I'm going to have, more freedoms, and it's also kind of the signal to the society that she's ready to date. And so it is somewhat like a debutante, does have a little bit of a debutante coming out type of a feel to it, but and it is a very old tradition, and I'm happy to see that it continues. And so there might, someone looking in from an American perspective might say, oh, this is so archaic and old-fashioned, but I am happy to see that those traditions are being passed down. And so there is, again, that mixed feeling of I'm saying goodbye to my childhood and here are my new responsibilities, and part of that is saying that I'm ready for marriage in a few years, maybe a whole lot more years.
Yeah, I'll say. Does it happen on the 15th birthday or just at some point in the 15th year?
As close to the birthday as you can get.
Okay, interesting. So your daughter would be going to her girlfriend's Siente. Is that the right word? I say right?
It was close, quince.
Quince.
I'll give you the short
Close.
version.
That wasn't even
Quince.
near. It wasn't even in the ballpark.
I was showing you some grace.
Quince?
Quince.
Quince. Quince. So if your daughter she'd have her own, and she'd go to all of her girlfriends. That's a lot of parties.
And it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
And it's a lot of understanding from, especially in my case specifically, we don't have a big Hispanic population here. So I'm thinking of maybe celebrating with my parents in their church, and where that is common to
Right.
know that you have a commitment. Sometimes these are planned out years ahead.
Right.
There's dances and choreography that you've got to learn. There's a financial commitment that you buy a dress. And this is just in the court, but it's an honor to be in that court.
I'm thinking, if a person wanted to keep the best of that and overlay it with some Christian coming into the next level of faith, maturity, a little, that could be very powerful. Manuela, we were talking earlier, went to England in your teenage years, went to school there, then to the States, but born and raised in Ghana. Rites of passage in Ghana, you were sharing, not Quince, but another milestone.
That's right. We were talking earlier about birth. And I think it's so interesting, just right at the onset, when a child is born. And actually, I was thinking back to it. I believe it's on the 8th day when a baby is born. And so that's when we confer your name. And it's a whole party. It's a celebration. There's a whole ritual that happens, Family gathers, friends. Of course, being Christians, we would have pastors and whatnot. But prior to the 8th day, when the ceremony happens, when you're born, we don't ever refer to a human being as it. So here when someone has a baby, what is it? Or when you say it's a boy, that would be insulting. You just don't use it for a person. And so when you're born, we have something all these years called your soul name. And it comes from the idea of, out of the 7 days of the week, the day that you were born is the day that God in his wisdom and providence said this is when your soul is appearing in flesh on the planet. And so for every person, now Ghana has how many millions of people? We have 7 days to pick from. So you have a name for a guy or a girl if you're born on a Sunday, a Monday, a Tuesday, every day of the week. And I'm an Ashanti, so my first language, of course, Tree. We have our names. And the minute you hear someone's name, you know what day they're born. Funny, I just remembered too, what has been so interesting is over the years, you can also even sometimes pinpoint personalities. When there's personality traits that come with the days of the week. It's a little weird. Not even so much superstitious. It's just
Cut away now to advertisement, please.
It's been very very interesting where there's just been some outstanding personality traits, and when you see a person within a few minutes of interacting with them, you can almost call them out.
You a Monday.
You calling me a Monday? You talking to me?
And so, you have your soul name, of course, on the 8th day. That's the naming ceremony. We got the privilege of doing it for the first time. I hadn't actually even been to one growing up because I lived in different places. But it was a day where, the babies brought out, the families gathered, and a key part of the ceremony, they bring out salt water, they bring out sugar water. And they'll dip their hands into the water, the salt water, and they'll put it on the tongue of the baby. And the significance of it, they'll tell you, they say, you taste this water, which is sweet. This world that you've entered, life has a tendency of being sweet. So you get a taste of sweetness. And then they'll put their hands in the salt water and say, it's a little bitter. Life also is going to come at you with a little bit of some bitterness. But this is the world you're being presented to. And then, and that's happening. The whole family's there. And then, whoever is officiating will ask, well, what is the name that the parents have chosen for this child? And that's when the funny part comes. I get upset now because when you have to fill your names here, it's like a first, a middle, and a last. I'm like, which of my middles do you want? Because we have multiple names. And so most likely, Ghana used to be a former British colony. So it's very common that we have English names, British names, or Christian names, we say. And you can have one or two of those. Or sometimes a family doesn't choose to even have that. And then you have your soul name. That's a given. It's always there. You are also named after somebody who has played a significant role in your parents' life. And it ranges. I was named after my great-grandmother. It varies. My whole siblings, everybody has it. Our kids now are named after, significant family members. And then you have your last name. And so all these names are declared. And what we did even with our kids is we also explain what these names are. And we're very particular with when it comes to naming a person. Because the idea is every time I say your name, I'm declaring what that name means. Good. And so, parents would have thought through before they give this name to the child. And
share with everybody your full name.
So my name is Manuela Ingrid Nana Efia Bima Asamoah.
And what's your oldest daughter's full name?
Janelle Abena Bempoma Asantewa Asamoah.
Asantewa, where did that come from?
So Asantewa, from our history, one of our, actually the most famous queen mothers that Ghana has ever had was called Ya Asantewa. Ya is because she's a woman who was born on a Thursday. So girls born on a Thursday are feisty. Like they can beat you down, serious. And it's, again, one of these personality traits. But in our history, there was a season where the British, had, of course, done a lot of damage, captured our kings and different things. And she was a queen mother. And realizing, our people are pretty much just being beaten out, the men were hiding. And this woman stood up and said, this is our land and the British can't take it. And she rallied the entire group just a few miles away from Kumasi, my home city, and they fought. And she was like Wonder Woman on steroids, literally. So if you hear the name Asantewa, you hear warrior, you know the word is coming. Well, she's actually my husband's side, so my mother-in-law's great-great-great-grandmother happens to be her, if you go down a couple lines. So she's right in the family line.
That's wonderful.
And again, we picked it on purpose, that
right.
You have a warrior to you.
Right. Both these are great examples of cultural milestones. And I think one of the great, not the great problems, one of the problems of modernism and postmodernism is the rejection of tradition. And when the Bible says, don't let the traditions of men, they're not talking about traditions per se. They're talking about where you attach to traditions meanings that God never intended, and you choke out the life of God. And young people today don't have the traditions that anchored their great-grandparents. They don't have coming out celebrations. They don't have naming celebrations. So this is the role of our church, to come into that wasteland and say, okay, no, we have rites of passage that are tied to biblical reasons that we're encouraging every family over a lifetime. You can't do milestones one year and next year stop. Because, right, you have to reflect on them, renew them, and you really hope your children carry it on, right? And so, Joel, and we talked about some Milestones Sunday that our church wants to celebrate with the families, help the families, these spiritual milestones. What are some of those?
Yeah, I think certainly birth is one of them. Lots of scriptural precedents of children in Scripture then being presented at the temple for both, not just circumcision, which was a sign of the Jewish covenant, but of dedication. I think that's a significant one. Pastor, you talked about salvation. Obviously, the most milestone you're going to celebrate, right, is the recognition where Holy Spirit opens our eyes to see that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that moment of commitment. Thereafter, baptism, what I think would be one, this more than public declaration, right, where you are fully becoming the new creation in baptismal waters, marks our children's lives. I think baptism of the Holy Spirit would be another one. It would be it would be more Catholic in this way, but the first time a child really understands communion. So not first communion in a Catholic manner, but just the moment that our children first encounter the Lord's table and really get it and capture it, I think would be a marker for them. I think ones where our students are going on mission trips, where they're encountering God. I know for me, my one of the markers in the sand that I can think of today, like it was yesterday. I was 17. I was forced to go on a mission trip that I didn't want to go on, and I had a dramatic encounter with the Lord, and not even for me. It was, we prayed for rain, and rain came. I mean, I won't waste time on the story, but that was a moment where the Lord planted a seed in me that didn't really actually come to fruition until probably another 4 years later. But those trips were, for lack of a word, exposing our young people to different cultures and different places of ministry. I think would be some markers, and there are obviously some others, but I think those kinds of things really anchor our students' lives.
Right. Rachel, you're in children's work. You have your own children, and we're an elementary school teacher. You're trained in that. Why would you say that milestones are important to kids?
Developmentally, especially in the age group that I work with, having a sense of competence is almost a turning point in a child, where they feel like I can do hard things or I cannot do hard things. And so having a kindergarten graduation isn't just cute, but it also says, wow, look what you've done. You can read now. You can write your name. Even if it is just 3-letter words, they've learned how to do something that they weren't able to do before. Competence, being capable. And so having those moments where, like a kindergarten graduation, shows them, one, and Pastor, it goes into a book that changed my life called The Blessing. And it tells them, hey, you are valuable to us. You belong to our family, and we love you. You're valuable, and you can do things. And it forecasts a future for them. And that also goes into a blessing, into the idea of what a blessing is. So it tells them what they can do and what they can continue to do. So if you can think of the flip side of that, of a kid who is struggling to write his name or can't pronounce things, and I've seen this. I've actually heard kids who have learning disabilities say, I don't like my brain. But if we could help that child come alongside, one, in an educational setting, but we're in a spiritual setting, we can come and touch this young heart to say, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. God made you just the way you are. And he looks at you and says, this is good, just like he did when he made rainbows and zebras. And we can, find their place in God's family, in his own in their story of creation, and telling them that value that they have, and then forecasting that, and then giving them those challenges or those places to meet, like a fifth grade sending. I'd like to say the fifth grade farewell. Like, you've done this, and now you're going into middle school. And that needs to be celebrated. That needs to be commemorated at all the things that because when you think of what they've done as a kindergartner, and they can surf the internet, right? That's big growth that they've had there. And then they start to think, even with these Bible stories, hey, Noah's Ark isn't just about animals. What about the people that were left behind? Because their minds are starting to grow. So that all happens in one stage of life. And that needs to be, we need to stop and pause and say, look at you, and look at God, and look at what's next.
I think every rite of passage has an element of celebration, doesn't it? Yeah. And I've heard some really outstanding teachings that a lot of the church has forgotten how to celebrate. We're all about the next thing. We're all about, a lot of individualism, but to celebrate, even some parts of our faith don't want to celebrate things like Christmas, because somehow that's associated with something, unquote, pagan, quote unquote. And I think that's not healthy. I think the idea of a family and a church having a number of things we kind of agree on, that these are worth celebrating. As you said, pause, eat well, laugh well, let somebody be the center of attention other than you, pray well, a prophetic gifting in the right kind of rites of passage. I think that would enrich our kids. Manuel, you think, your oldest is now 13, 12?
13.
She's 13, so you have a young lady now in your home, and thinking about all this coming in her life down the road, and you have two boys, a miracle child that maybe shouldn't even be here today. God heard our prayers for him. And do you see that rites of passage would give anchor points for your children as they go into adult life?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Sunday when you were preaching, by the way, I have to say, I'm just stealing your idea of your family with the purity rings that you mentioned about with your sons. I had never heard it, but there's something in my soul. I was like, we're adding that to our family one. But I remember when our daughter turned 13, she's 13 and a half now, and leading up to it, like in my soul, I was like, oh my word, like she's not a baby anymore, she's growing. And so my mind went back to when I moved to England as a 15-year-old, I didn't have any context from Ghana, so I can't quite remember where the idea came from, other than I think maybe some mission teams with YWAM or Team Mania might have planted a seed. But I remember when I moved to England, I think a year into it, I actually went to the market area. There was like a bazaar thing going on, and I felt to purchase a purity ring for myself. I think it was like 40 pounds, which was huge back then. But I just had this thing, and I think I might have seen one of the Team Manias maybe share the testimony. And so I've always had one. I bought it for myself. It wasn't our family tradition. I've had it forever. Well, as my daughter's about to be 13, all of a sudden I said, I want her to have her own. We only have one daughter. And so I actually went to the store, the Christian bookstore, looked at a whole number of them. And then I was like, we're so different in taste. I'm going to bring her herself to pick what she would like. So, we had that. That became
She's born on a Thursday.
So funny. We are different in so many ways. But, had the time just to take her, picked it out. And I'm so thankful because now I feel like we've started something. Now I have something to do with the boys that's different from her. But I remember sitting with her in the car driving home. And we parked. We just parked right there and talked. And I said, Nellie, this is a moment you becoming a teenager, a young woman. Reminded her of promises God spoke to us before she was born. Like she knows these things, which reminds me, one of even the family traditions that I've seen my kids are so grateful for. They'll come and sit and they'll say, tell us the story of how we came to be before we came to be. And it's become such a joy for them. Like there'll be some Fridays, I'm like, I don't want to say the story one more time. Like I've told you everything. But they love to hear that God spoke, and each of them have their own. Like our daughter, the Lord spoke about it before I was even married. the miracle baby, he'll walk, he'll even tell you, I even have my own sign, see? But it's just interesting. And now I'm realizing that's part of their milestones. Like, I didn't just show up. There's purpose that God had for me here, which make me realize the kids having these milestones, they can look back and they can say, that season happened. God was faithful in it. Yep. We finished that season, which I think, Pastor, something I'm thinking about from your sermon is milestones are also helping to give a good ending to seasons of life. Like where you live that season and then you end it well so that we can celebrate it. And then now you begin the new season. Of course, ultimately, death is the greatest ending here. Just last week, Rachel, we had the late pastor's retreat, and one of the ladies we were sharing, and they brought this idea of maybe we should have this thing of everybody go and sit through your funeral before you die. So like we have a funeral ceremony where you sit and you hear what people speak of the person you were. Because you never hear your... But what would it do? Because, you could, God forbid, you could hear things. You'd be like, that's what you're seeing me as now. I need to go and repent and live well. Because ultimately, that's going to be the ending for eternity.
Right. I mentioned on Sunday that rites of passage create identity in us, a destiny. And then I threw that third thought in there that we join a community. And I think of like weddings, we'd all agree that weddings are rites of passage in the church and outside of the church. Here's my problem with modern weddings, is that there is not, the community aspect is diminished, and it's become all about the bride. Here's a there are two families coming together here that have aunties and uncles, and there's the joining of two branches of the tree of humanity. That's big. Number two, the parents should have been involved in the approval of the wedding. The asking of the hand in marriage has now become perfunctory. It used to be a real deal. And if dad said no, you had to wait until dad said yes. And so the wedding was the father-in-law saying to the new son-in-law, she's now yours, I approve. It's also saying, if you get out of line, there's 50 men in this room now that are in the family. And we have permission. I like that communal thing in a wedding, and every part has a communal thing, and not just the bride. It's all about the bride. In lots of ways, it's about the mothers or the fathers. You don't know what walking the girl down. I've not done it yet. Your dad's done it. Your dad's done it. Your father's done it. What'd that be like, Joel, when you walk down your daughter?
Not going to.
No.
Nope, both of them, they just get locked up.
You're going to have the opposite of the debutante ball. You're going to have you're coming back in to the family.
Get back in the womb.
But Joel, that idea of community.
Yeah.
And how, you're a wonderful pastor. As the church rallies around our families, what could that do to strengthen the church?
So, one of the things that I find, Pastor, you brought it out in your sermon, is the way these memorial stones or milestones work is somebody who hasn't experienced something has to ask someone who has, right? And in asking them, the adult, the parent, they're portraying the work of God in their life and passing that incredible faithfulness on through this actual place and an actual time God actually did something. Right? The Jordan River was an actual place. The parting of the Red Sea too, but of the Jordan River was an actual thing, and those were actual stones and an actual dynamic that now these what were first graders, second graders, third graders are asking their parents on, and those stones were a story about God's faithfulness. We talk about this all the time. The number one factor that they have found that helps students progress in their spiritual lives is 5 people who are not their family are engaged in their life. That's 5 different individuals' memorial stones, 5 different individuals' journeys where they've got their own altars that those students need to hear. My kids don't need to hear Joel and Avery's stones alone, right? They need to hear Rachel's and Dan's and Manuela's and Jeremy's and Dana's and right, you can insert anybody names that you want. And so when we think about the Imagine campaign, this is not just the parents learning how to navigate milestones for their own kids. That's obviously very important. But this is the entire church saying, your kids and my kids, those are my kids, where we own everybody's kids. So the grandfather or the grandma with kids or without kids, the single adult with kids or without kids, the married couple with kids or without kids, we've got to recognize that our altars of remembrance are for everyone. And when we engage in children's ministry, we are opening up our own stories that these children need to hear. My son Aiden is going to experience things that I don't have an altar of remembrance for. But you know what? Matt does. You know what? Cobby does. My daughter's going to have things that needs an altar of remembrance that Avery doesn't have, but Miss Rhonda's going to have it, right? And we've got to, the whole church has got to see that our altars of remembrance are for everyone. And that it only gets transferred if I'm in relational proximity to these children to actually share that with them. And that's the issue, relational proximity. The other thing that I think that we do is, through whatever reason, sometimes these altars of remembrance come from God redeeming failures and moments, low moments, not the high moments. And we want to let the Jordan River wash over and cover those altars of remembrance and not tell anybody. And sometimes we've got to pull the shame back, the guilt back of these altars to say, yeah, I got an altar here, but it came from a painful place. And that is a teaching moment that we've got to be vulnerable enough, even with our students, to say, I screwed this one up pretty bad. I have an altar of remembrance that God in his grace redeemed it. The number of times, Pastor, you've talked about God's plan B, C, D, E is always better than the plan A in our life, because grace is. Sometimes I think we hide our altars of remembrance because of that shame, and it's to the detriment of young students and the fifth graders and middle schoolers, and we've got to just be vulnerable and authentic to say, this altar of remembrance come from a bad place, but let me explain to you how this works to shape you. So I think for the whole church, that's how this can play out well.
Amen to that. In this imagine inside joke, if you're watching, I keep calling it the Inspire campaign instead of the Imagine campaign. But in the Imagine campaign, well, this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to equip our parents to partner with the church family ministry together to execute these milestones. Now, we've shared today, there's family milestones, there's cultural milestones, there are testimonies, in a sense, are all milestones. But we're talking about a particular group that go birth, baptism, salvation, baptism, then some kind of a confirmation, a welcoming to adult life, bar mitzvah, debutante, that thing. And what we're doing here is we're tacking it on. We're putting it in there about 8th grade. This is new, where these 8th graders have studied for a year or two in our Disciple U curriculum. And we are saying, welcome to another level of maturity. We're going to treat you different in the church. Look at you different. Then we've got senior high school graduation, which I think can, if done right, can really be a powerful spiritual, right? Remember where you came from when you go out there in that world. And each of these milestones would have parental preparation. For example, baby dedication, there's a 1-day prep before you do it. Each of these, there would be a preparation with the family. And then, of course, then you'd have weddings, which we have premarital. Then you have a funeral, which is a different kind of milestone, of course, but it's a bookend. We celebrate you and name your name. My name means God is my judge. And then at the end of my life, the congregation essentially names me and says, this is the kind of man he was. And it's the bookend. Now, This is a big deal. And it's the church, and I know we're talking about the sermon. We're going to take a lot of effort as a church to maintain the emphasis on milestones. It's going to be easy to do it for a year, but we need to sustain it for a whole generation. Yeah. Right? So that baby dedications are something that every young girl and young future husband-to-be will look forward to when this child is not only presented, but there's a promise placed over the child to be raised in the faith. Let me say something I had just mentioned a minute ago as I kind of conclude my remarks, and each of you can share whatever you'd like to share on the topic. The modern family has been stripped of masculine and feminine roles. It's like they have to be androgynous. Going, I kind of know what you're saying, but I also know the damage that does. The modern family has been stripped from communal activities. It's all now individual on social media. The modern family is involved in 1,000 activities. Therefore, every activity has the same value. When you're raised on a farm back in 1850, these things were huge because the only time the whole family ever got together. The modern family, everything has been secularized, minimized, ground down to the absolute lowest denominator. And we're saying we want to have special times of remembrance, special times of celebrating. We want to set before the congregation our children at these important times, and the congregation wants to come along and say, we're witnessing this, we're a part of this, welcome to our community. There's no guarantee this changes the trajectory of every child's life, but I think it's anchor points. Yep. And we can do it without being Catholic, or without being Hispanic or African. We can do it just by being Christian and say, these are the things in the Christian faith we find important, and we contextualize it with our culture, and we take it from there. So anyway, closing thoughts on milestones. Let's start with you, Rachel.
I know we're talking about big events, but I also feel like that are built in. But I feel like what Manuela said, we can find something that's special to us and celebrate that. I got a little bit of flack from some of my family members, but when my girls became 2 digits, they became 10, I wanted to get their ears pierced at that time.
You didn't.
I did. Why didn't you get them pierced when they were a baby? Or why didn't you do? And I didn't think 10 was a big deal, but to me it felt like a big deal. I wanted, as I'm a very big believer in celebrating life and celebrating milestones. So 10 became a big thing. And I like to look at other cultures and see what they do as well. And I came across the You Are Special plate. I'm like, what is this? I've never heard of this. And it's not a very pretty plate. It's red.
Red.
Super red.
Yep.
And it just says, you are special today, or today you are special. And and the idea came out of European immigrants who settled in the Midwest. Joel's saying yes because he's from Michigan. And they would have this one red special plate for anything that was special about that person. So not just on their birthday. Maybe you really struggled.
You saved it for special meals.
Special meals, right. Yes. So let's say you were really struggling with that algebra test, and you finally made an A in algebra. You will get that plate. So I really liked that idea. That is totally outside of my culture. I've never heard of that. I was looking at different ways to have more blessing incorporated in my family. And I guess that's really what I'm saying. I want blessing in my family. I want them to know, whether they are a visitor, when you cross into that threshold, that you are welcomed, that we love you, we value you, and not only that, you're a part of our family, even if it's for a moment, and we're going to send you off with the Lord's blessing and believe in the best in you. So little plates celebrating small milestones. I know we're talking about the big ones, but I also feel like within your own family rhythm, you can find some that will come out naturally.
You're talking about the piercing of the ears. That is such a good practical illustration. Like, both daughters had to wait till 10.
Yeah.
So the second daughter couldn't hurry up and get hers because first daughter.
And she wanted to.
She wanted to, but she had to wait. So that was a big deal. With our kids, we made them wait till they were 16 to date. Now, there was no the piercing of the ears, but it was that date on the calendar that after that date, they could date. And I just thought of, as you were saying it, it's one of those things in our culture. Pierced ears are big deals. Dating's a big deal. And to have a little bit of a celebration. What about the nose? When can you get the nose pierced?
No.
16?
When you can
How
pay
about
for
the
it
tongue?
yourself and
Can
your
you get
own
the
house.
tongue pierced?
You
How
on
about
your
the
own.
lips? Can you get the lips pierced?
Listen, in
No.
our
Mommy-
family,
Mommy is only
we
gonna
mark
pay
birth
for
by
the ears.
tattoos. So the birth baby comes out, tattoo him right from the jump street.
You wait, Joel, till your son at age 12 wants to get a tat.
Well, legally he can't until he's 18, so it's okay.
So that's the rule. 18 for tats. Okay, show people your tat.
Well, I've got like
tell everyone
12.
what it says.
I've got like 12. It runs from my wrist all the way up to my chest. I've got 4 in this arm and 1 on my back. So unless we want to get inappropriate, I probably shouldn't show you.
You could tell that he wasn't born in the Old Testament. He would not be here. Manuela, closing thoughts.
Well, I think maybe I'll shift it to just as a church in terms of one of our milestones. I cannot give a shout out enough to Disciple You this season. I've had the joy of course, having our oldest be a part of it and just seeing her. I think Jill mentioned as well, someone else speaking into your life. But I am besides myself seeing her joy coming. They'll spend an hour and a half, 2 hours. Sometimes they're just having fun or going into the Word. She'll come, and Joel is poured into her life. Liam, Jackson, Pastor Melvin, I think, was there, Pastor Jeremy. And my joy is that, her as well as all the other kids coming, these kids are being shaped in their walk with God by our church family. Like, these are people I trust. If any one of you speaks into my kid's life, I 100% trust. I don't have to worry about what you said. And this brings joy that it's safe. So maybe you're new, maybe you've just joined New Life and you're not too sure. I just am giving you firsthand, what's the word? Testimony. Disciple You has been phenomenal.
And Disciple You is 7th and 8th grade. You have to apply to be in it, which is basically a way of saying you're going to commit to come. And they meet every week during school year, right, Joel? In the summers, they go on a missions trip or something. And then after 2 years, I think we cover about 40 topics. Atonement, communion, stuff that's really important. We haven't had our first graduating class yet. When's that? Coming up soon. And we'll have a presentation to the church like a confirmation. I hate to use that language because everybody thinks you're Lutheran or some. No, but it's going to be significant. Pastor Joel, last thought.
In this Joshua 4 text, Pastor, the Lord makes it really evident that the ark is to go first. In Joshua 3 is the description of the same thing. He says, put the ark in front of the camp. And then the ark, the embodiment of the Lord's manifest presence, the water doesn't subside until the ark goes into the water. And our kids are being bombarded with so much. And even though we have some of these age anchor points, emotionally they're being driven to maturity way faster than has ever, I would think, in our humanity time. And so these milestones are meant more than just age demographic parts and more than just emotional ones. I think that they are. It's meant to be an impartation of the Lord's presence in their lives, these moments, right? And as those who are not just orthodox in belief but charismatic in practice. I view these moments of baptism and of communion and confirmation and dedication and mission trips as moments where we get to impart a sense of the Lord's presence in them, where prophetic words are prayed and spoken. You know, that you preached week 1 about Timothy, right? Well, Paul's writing and says there was a gift put in you by the laying hands of prophecy, right? Stir that up. And so I think if we as a church family as a whole and individual families cannot just look at these milestones as just cultural, though that's very important, and just sociological, though important, but moments of impartation where the Lord's presence is a real and a regular thing in our students' lives. That's going to be that which keeps them in the faith post-graduation of high school.
Yeah, and without the Holy Spirit doing that, it becomes a ritual that doesn't really have any power long term. Hey, everybody, thank you for joining us today. Go on to the website if you'd like to know more about the Imagine campaign. We've set some ambitious goals. Our heart is to have a campaign where no child's left behind. And every kid is as precious as gold in this church. And we're just so grateful you join us. And by the way, the 3 of you, you're fantastic parents. It's a privilege to be with you today. See y'all. Bye.